A 5-year marriage built on lies crumbled with the shocking discovery. My husband used me to seize my fortune. When I found the hidden plans in the closet, my world stopped. Upon showing the evidence to my lawyer, he simply smiled. What seemed like my end transformed into the beginning of my liberation. A story of betrayal, justice, and rebirth that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave your like, and comment on where you're watching from. I never imagined that at 55, I would be sitting in a luxurious office on Fifth Avenue, listening to my lawyer confirm what my heart refused to accept. Charles, the man who made me coffee every morning and called me my queen, meticulously planned every gesture of affection over the past 5 years. I always suspected that a man 15 years younger could fall in love with the owner of a chain of home decor stores. But he was convincing. Money has never been important to me, Elizabeth. It's you who fascinates me. How foolish I was to believe those rehearsed words. I found the documents by chance. A shoebox hidden in the false bottom of our walk-in closet. Perhaps he counted on my lack of interest in home repairs. Ironic for someone who built an empire, selling furniture and decor. The papers trembled in my hands as I scanned detailed notes about my assets, copies of bank statements, drafts of powers of attorney, and an action plan for the next 2 years. Phase 4 suggests selling the upstate, stores claiming optimization. Exactly what he had proposed at our last wedding anniversary dinner. The pain was physical. A tightness in my chest that made me hunch over the marble table in the dining room. 3 decades building the largest home decor chain in the country, and I hadn't noticed the con artist sleeping beside me. Tears streamed silently down my face as I mentally replayed every moment of our relationship. The expensive gifts he pretended to refuse because he didn't care about material possessions. The business trips that multiplied in the last year. The sudden interest in the company's finances when he always claimed not to understand business. When I showed the documentation to Dr. Miller, my lawyer of over 20 years, I expected to find seriousness and indignation. Instead, after carefully flipping through each page, he smiled. A contained, almost imperceptible smile. Mrs. Elizabeth, your husband is meticulous, I must admit. But he made a fundamental mistake. I raised my eyes, intrigued. He forged your signature on a transfer of shares from the holding company in Connecticut. An impressive forgery, I must say. But he forgot that that specific document required notarization for authenticity. Your husband created a clear trail of fraudulent intent. I didn't feel immediate relief, just a strange calm, as if my body was preparing for a battle that would require more calculation than emotion. How much time do we have before he realizes the mistake? I asked, already thinking like the businesswoman I always was, not the betrayed wife. If he follows the schedule he drew up, approximately 3 weeks. Enough time to shield your assets and prepare the necessary documentation. Dr. Miller spoke with the tranquility of someone who had faced similar cases before. You're lucky you found out now. A few more months and we would have a much more complicated scenario. Lucky. What an inadequate word to define my situation. I had everything but luck. I grew up in Queens, the daughter of Portuguese immigrants who worked in garment factories until they got sick. While my friends dreamed of perfect weddings, I vowed to build something that no one could take away from me. And I did. I started by selling imported goods at flea markets, then opened a small store in Soho. Today, Elizabeth Home Design has 32 locations in 10 states. Maybe that's why marriage came late for me. At 50, I had already achieved everything I aspired to professionally, but I returned to an empty apartment every night. I met Charles at an art opening. He was attentive, cultured, interested in every word I said. Our age and financial differences seemed irrelevant in the face of the connection we felt. At least, the connection I naively believed I felt. Would you like me to contact the police immediately? Asked Dr. Miller, interrupting my train of thought. No. My answer was instinctive. I want to understand the extent of this first. I want to know who this man I thought I knew really is. What I discovered in the following weeks shattered the few illusions I still held. Charles Montenegro was a partially fabricated identity. Born Charles Muniz in upstate New York, he had legally changed his last name after a messy divorce 6 years earlier. Before me, He had been involved with 2 other successful businesswomen. One of them lost a significant portion of her assets before discovering the fraud. The other managed to protect herself legally, but suffered emotional distress that kept her away from business. That night, I couldn't sleep. The facts aligned with disturbing clarity. I watched Charles sleeping beside me, his face serene, his graying temples that so enchanted me by giving him a more mature air. How could he sleep so peacefully while executing a plan to destroy me? I felt a cold, calculating hatred. I wouldn't explode as he probably expected me to when I found out everything. No, I would be as methodical as he was. The next morning, I maintained the routine. Strong coffee for him, toast with apricot jam that a client brought from France especially for me. Polite smiles, questions about his schedule for the day. He left for work, a consulting office that I now suspected was just a front for his operations. As soon as I was alone, I started to act. First, I transferred significant amounts to accounts he didn't know about. Old investments I kept as an emergency fund, a legacy of my immigrant parents' cautious thinking. Then, I contacted the managers of 5 strategic branches, just regular business instructions, but with small changes in procedures that would hinder any external attempt at interference. Charles returned promptly at 7 p.m. as always. We had dinner with trivial conversation. Outwardly, I was the same Elizabeth as always. Internally, every cell in my body was on alert, analyzing his expressions, detecting patterns in his seemingly innocent questions. How was the meeting with the Italian supplier? He asked casually. We had to postpone it. Problems with the import documentation. I lied with the same naturalness with which he lived. The meeting had taken place, and we closed a significant deal. Information he would certainly use if he knew. 3 days later, I came home early and found the apartment empty. Nothing unusual, except for the office drawer slightly ajar. Charles never left drawers open. He was almost obsessive about organization. A quick check confirmed he had taken his passport, birth certificate, and some personal documents. The expensive gifts he received during our marriage, Swiss watches, gold cufflinks, collector's pens, remained untouched. An hour later, I received a text message. Elizabeth, we need some time apart. I'm not the man you deserve. Don't look. For me, I need to sort out issues from my past. I laughed alone in the middle of the living room, a con artist with a sense of drama. He realized I had discovered something, but apparently didn't know exactly what or how much. His sudden escape, leaving the valuables behind, didn't fit the meticulous profile I saw in the documents. It was the first significant inconsistency. He's probably testing your reaction, explained Dr. Miller when I informed him of the disappearance. He wants to see if you'll confront him immediately or if you'll try to locate him desperately. Both reactions would give him valuable information. What, if I simply don't react? That will disconcert him. Silence is rarely the response that fraudsters expect. I followed the advice. I didn't reply to the message, didn't look for him, didn't show any public change in my routine. I continued managing my stores, attending social events, meeting with suppliers and important clients. The pain and anger remained, but now channeled into a cold determination. Every night alone at home was an exercise in self-control and planning. At the traditional charity dinner of the Italian-American Cultural Institute, held at the Rainbow Room, I experienced the first major surprise in this process. I was talking to a group of architects when I noticed a woman watching me insistently. Around 40 years old, short brown hair, an elegant posture that contrasted with clothes that were too simple for that environment. Mrs. Elizabeth Vieira? She approached during the cocktail reception. Could I speak to you privately? My name is Cecilia Lawrence. I'm a professor of American literature at NYU. We found a relatively secluded spot near the windows that offered a panoramic view of downtown Manhattan. Excuse the direct approach, but I recognized you from the photos on social media. You're married to Charles Montenegro, correct? The use of the present tense, you're married, did not go unnoticed. Yes, although we are temporarily separated. She smiled bitterly. Let me guess. He disappeared suddenly, leaving a vague message about sorting out issues from the past? My heart raced. but I kept my expression neutral. Do you know my husband? I knew Charles when he still used the last name Muniz. We dated for almost 2 years, and he also disappeared abruptly when I started asking questions about inconsistencies in his stories. For the next 30 minutes, Cecilia shared a version of Charles that we never knew. The only child of an elementary school teacher from upstate New York, a graduate in business administration from a second-tier private university in the city, an obsessive collector of rare books, especially first editions of modernist poets. He set up a small bookstore in Greenwich Village. He was always in debt, but refused to sell certain copies from his collection, even in the worst financial times. That didn't fit the image of the calculating con artist. Charles never showed any particular interest in literature during our relationship. He preferred art museums and musical performances, and he certainly never mentioned a bookstore or past debts. Why are you telling me this now? I asked when she finished. Her account. Cecilia hesitated. Because I heard he's doing it again. A colleague from the psychology department mentioned an anonymous patient with a very specific case. A man who maintains parallel identities and simultaneous relationships, not out of emotional compulsion, but as an economic survival strategy. She paused. The similarities were too many to be a coincidence. I got his name after some investigation, and here I am. You still have feelings for him. It wasn't a question. She looked away at the illuminated city below. I have feelings for the person I thought he was, and for the woman I was when I believed in him. I recognized in her a reflection of my own process, the duality between anger at the betrayal and pain at the loss, not of the real person, but of the idea we built of him. Thank you for your honesty, Cecilia. This will help me more than you can imagine. In the following weeks, I deepened my investigations. I hired a private investigator recommended by Dr. Miller, Augustus Cervelo, a retired NYPD detective specializing in financial fraud. He was the one who discovered the property in upstate New York. It's a 3-acre estate in the Catskills, registered under the name MTC Cultural Enterprises, explained Augustus, showing me aerial photos of the property. MTC has no registered employees or apparent commercial activities in the last 2 years, but maintains an active bank account with monthly transactions between $5,000 and $7,000. Something about the company name triggered an alarm in my memory. MTC, Charles Muniz Montenegro, the inverted initials, and the Catskills, a region he had mentioned casually a few times as a hidden paradise in New York, where he would like to retire one day. I decided to visit the place personally. I traveled with Augustus, introducing ourselves as potential buyers interested in properties in the area. The caretaker, a simple man named John, was easily persuaded to show us the estate when we mentioned values significantly above the market. What we found in the main house was disturbing. An entire room transformed into a technical reserve, with temperature and humidity control. On the walls and in special storage boxes, I immediately recognized my collection of Latin American art. Works by Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, Rufino Tamayo, among others, which had been declared lost in a fire at my company's warehouse 2 years earlier. A fire that generated an insurance payout of approximately $4 million. Are you all right? Asked Augustus, noticing my paleness. No, I wasn't. That fire occurred a few months after I formally presented my collection to Charles. He had shown genuine enthusiasm, asking detailed questions about provenance, value, and historical significance of each piece. At the time, I interpreted it as sincere interest in my passion. Now, I realized it was an inventory for the scam. The most frightening thing was that I couldn't simply report the finding. I had signed the insurance documents, received the payout. If I claimed now that the works were intact, I would be investigated for fraud, even if involuntary. Charles had put me in a perfect trap. We need to get out of here, I whispered to Augustus, and it's best if no one knows about this visit. On the way back to the city, I broke my self-imposed silence and called Dr. Miller. I'm in an impossible situation, I explained after recounting what we found. If I report the theft of the works, I incriminate myself for insurance fraud. If I secretly recover the pieces, I become an accomplice to the same crime. You didn't commit fraud consciously, he argued. "There are ways to prove that you were misled by your husband. And how do I explain not recognizing my own collection in the photos of the fire?" Charles showed me images of charred paintings, melted sculptures. I should have realized they were forgeries. "You're being too hard on yourself. No one expects betrayal of this level from someone they love." Love. The word sounded absurd now. What I felt for Charles was an elaborate illusion, carefully constructed to exploit my vulnerabilities. The ruthless businesswoman, who closed million-dollar deals without hesitation, had been completely blind in the personal realm. The following week, fleeing the oppression I felt in the city, I accepted an invitation to the Tanglewood Music Festival in the Berkshires. Music has always been my refuge, and the idea of a few days immersed in classical concerts seemed like the perfect escape. I was walking through Lenox, the central area of the town, when the encounter occurred that would completely change my understanding of the situation. At a cafe called the Yom Shop, a woman of about 70 years old waved discreetly from a table in the corner. Initially, I ignored it, thinking it was a mistake, but she got up and walked determinedly towards me. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I'm Teresa Muniz, Charles's mother." I froze. According to Charles, his mother had passed away when he was 20. He even showed me old photos and a small locket that he said had belonged to her. "You must be confusing me with someone else," I replied, trying to walk away. "I'm not confused. Charles has shown me photos of you many times. He said he was in love with the most extraordinary woman he had ever met." Her tired eyes held mine firmly. "He made me promise never to look for you. He said he was ashamed of his simple origins, that I would ruin everything if I showed up." I had faced many difficult negotiations in my life, but nothing prepared me to talk to the supposedly dead mother of the man who planned to ruin me. For 2 hours, on a park bench to the distant sound of the symphony orchestra's rehearsal, Teresa told me a story that didn't completely fit either Charles's version or the image of the cold con artist I had built. Charles grew up in humble circumstances in a small town in upstate New York, the only child of Teresa, a widowed teacher who struggled to support them on a meager salary. From an early age, he showed exceptional intelligence and a special talent for understanding people, their desires, weaknesses, emotional needs. He got a full scholarship to a prestigious private school, where he mingled with classmates from a much higher social class. "That's where the transformation began," explained Teresa sadly. "He learned to reinvent himself, to hide our origins, to create narratives that brought him closer to that world he so desired. He graduated in business administration and tried a career in traditional companies, but never adapted to the corporate structure. He opened a small bookstore specializing in rare books, taking advantage of the knowledge acquired in his teenage jobs at used bookstores. The business prospered moderately until a flood destroyed much of the collection. Debts accumulated. That's when he met Cecilia. My son is not a monster," defended Teresa, with the unwavering loyalty that only mothers possess. "But he has a terrible talent for convincing himself that his ends justify the means, that one day he will make up for all the damage he has caused. Did you know about the scams? The frauds?" Teresa lowered her eyes. "I suspected. I tried to confront him a few times, but Charles is a master at telling only convenient parts of the truth. He said he was reorganizing finances, equalizing disparities." She paused painfully. "Then he met you. Something changed. For the first time, he seemed genuinely involved. He talked about building something legitimate, using his talents to grow alongside you, not at your expense. Beautiful words to cover up more lies. Maybe, but I also saw genuine guilt in him. He visited me secretly every 2 months, always bringing elaborate gifts that I didn't need, as if he was trying to buy forgiveness for something he couldn't confess. That conversation left me deeply disturbed. The one-dimensional figure of the calculating villain gained uncomfortable complexities. Not that it justified his actions, but it made everything more emotionally confusing. Upon returning to the city, I received the third major revelation. Dr. Miller had hired international investigation specialists to track possible developments in Charles's activities abroad. The result was shocking. "He maintains a parallel life in Lisbon, Portugal," explained the lawyer, showing me photographs and documents. "There, he is known as Carlos Montenegro Tavares, an import and export businessman. He has been married for 12 years to Mariana Duarte, a university professor. They have 2 teenage children, Miguel, 16, and Sofia, 14. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not just the marital betrayal, but the existence of a complete family, established years before he met me. The financial scams seemed almost secondary in the face of that double life. Investigators confirmed that this family is also being financially manipulated, continued Dr. Miller. Charles controls the household finances, manages a significant inheritance that Mariana received from her parents, and has recently started transferring assets to offshore accounts. Do they know? Does she know? Apparently not. They believe the story of the successful businessman who needs to travel constantly. The children see him as a heroic figure, especially the boy, who plans to follow in his father's footsteps in international business. I felt nauseous. It was one thing to run financial scams against women he was briefly involved with. It was quite another to build an extensive family life based on lies, involving innocent children who grew up admiring a man who didn't exist. It was during the traditional 4th of July festivities that I organized for company employees and partners that I had the 4th disturbing revelation. Joan, my personal assistant for 8 years, a person of complete trust who knew every detail of my professional life and much of my personal life, seemed nervous throughout the celebration. Initially, I attributed it to the stress of the preparations, but then I caught her on a whispered phone call outside, clearly mentioning Charles's name. I contained the urge to confront her immediately. Instead, I discreetly asked Augustus, the detective, to monitor her in the following days. The confirmation came quickly. Joan met with Charles at a hotel near the airport. It wasn't a romantic encounter, but clearly a professional one. They exchanged documents, talked intensely for almost 2 hours. The professional betrayal hurt almost as much as the personal one. Joan knew every vulnerable aspect of my business, every strategic plan, every potential acquisition. In her hands, this information was a lethal weapon for someone planning to ruin me financially. Do I fire her immediately? I asked Dr. Miller when I informed him of the situation. Not yet. Let's use this to our advantage. Let her think she remains unsuspected, but start feeding her controlled, slightly altered information. This will allow us to track exactly what is being shared and possibly lead us to others involved. During the following weeks, I meticulously followed this plan. I shared with Joan, in confidence, information about fabricated negotiations, non-existent, potential financial problems, restructuring plans that I would never implement, each bait carefully monitored. It was while analyzing this flow of information that I made another alarming discovery. Examining old bank records, I identified a pattern of small transfers to an obscure account that began not 5 years ago when I met Charles, but 7, 2 years before I even knew of his existence. This implied that the plan to target me had been conceived long before our seemingly casual encounter at the art opening. It wasn't a coincidence. I was studied, selected, and approached as a target. The perfection with which Charles fit into my personal preferences, cultural interests, and even my unrevealed insecurities was the result of meticulous research. But who could have provided such detailed information about me even before the first contact? The answer lay in tracing that obscure account. The ultimate beneficiary was a consulting firm specializing in competitive research, and the one who hired their services was Richard Brandt, my former business partner, who sold his stake in the company after a disagreement about international expansion 6 years ago. Richard never fully accepted that I was right about the business strategy. Time proved that my vision was more accurate. The stores grew exponentially following my plan, while his new ventures failed successively. Apparently, revenge was planned coldly and patiently. This discovery changed everything. It wasn't just Charles acting on his own, but a broader conspiracy with motivations that went beyond simple financial gain. There was an element of personal revenge that made everything more dangerous and unpredictable. October arrived with a twist I couldn't anticipate. Charles reappeared, not furtively or by chance, but with a direct call to my personal cell phone. "Elizabeth, we need to talk. I know you found out almost everything, but you don't know the main thing." I remained calm. "And why would I believe anything you say now?" "Because I'm willing to give everything back. Every penny, every work of art, every asset I diverted. All I ask is for help to protect my family in Portugal. The audacity was disconcerting. Your family? Are you referring to the wife and children you kept hidden throughout our marriage? A heavy silence. So you really did find out everything. His voice was different. There was none of the usual confidence, the studied charm. He sounded tired, defeated. They're in danger, Elizabeth. Not because of me directly, but by association. Richard's creditors have discovered the scheme, and now they're threatening Mariana and the kids if I don't hand over certain compromising documents. Richard Brandt, you admit you worked with him against me? Initially, yes. He was the one who hired me, who financed the operation in the beginning. But things changed. Changed how? Did you suddenly develop a conscience? He sighed. I don't expect you to believe this, but yes, something changed. I didn't plan to fall in love with you, Elizabeth. It was just supposed to be a job, like others before. But he hesitated. You're different. Authentic in a way I've never known before. For the past 2 years, I've been living in a personal hell, trying to reconcile what I started with, what I really feel. Spare me the melodrama, Charles. Or should I? Call you Carlos Muniz Tavares? How many other names do you use? I deserve that and much more. I just ask you to meet me once. After that, if you still want to hand me over to the police, I'll accept the consequences. I consulted Dr. Miller immediately after the call. He was emphatic. It's a trap. He wants to manipulate you emotionally or create a compromising situation. You shouldn't meet him alone under any circumstances. I agreed with the assessment, but something in Charles's voice, a vulnerability I had never detected before, bothered me. Furthermore, the mention of Richard's creditors and threats against innocent people was a new element that we couldn't completely ignore. We agreed on a cautious approach. The meeting would take place in a public place, with discreet security and recording devices. I chose the Metropolitan Museum of Art, recently reopened after years of renovation. A Saturday afternoon, with enough people to ensure safety, but not so many as to make a private conversation impossible. Charles appeared punctually, without the impeccable look he always maintained. He was visibly haggard, with a stubble and dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said simply, when we sat down on a secluded bench near the garden. "Let's get straight to the point. What compromising documents is Richard looking for?" He took a flash drive out of his pocket. "All the records of the illicit financial operations of the last 8 years. Not just what we did against you, but previous schemes involving money laundering, tax evasion, and embezzlement of public funds in 3 different states. Richard is not just a resentful businessman, but a key player in a broader corruption network. Why should I believe this?" I kept my tone cold, despite the internal turmoil I felt. Because I included evidence against myself. This flash drive incriminates me as much as Richard. If you hand it over to the authorities, we'll both go to jail. He looked directly into my eyes. It's a risk I'm willing to take to ensure my family's safety. I examined his face, looking for the signs of manipulation that I could now identify. The slight raising of his right eyebrow when he lied. The excessive blinking when he rehearsed a story. I found none. "Does your family in Portugal know who you really are?" He looked away. "Mariana discovered parts of the truth recently. It was devastating for her. The children still don't know. And I hope I can explain in my own way, if there's still time. And how exactly can I help? What are you asking for?" "Temporary asylum and legal protection. Mariana and the children will arrive in the country in 3 days with temporary identities. I need to keep them safe until we can testify against Richard and his associates. After that, I'll accept any legal consequences of my actions." The irony of the situation did not escape me. The man who meticulously planned to ruin me was now begging for my help. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately, to let him face the chaotic scenario he had created alone. But another part, perhaps the pragmatic businesswoman, or perhaps something deeper and more human, recognized the unique opportunity that presented itself. "I'll consider it. But first, I need concrete proof of your intentions, something that shows you're not just running another one of your elaborate schemes." Charles nodded as if he already expected this condition. "Fair enough. There's a safe deposit box at Chase Bank. Wall Street branch, registered under the name MTC Enterprises. The code is your birth date reversed. Inside are transfer documents that return to you the legal ownership of all the artwork in the Catskills, as well as proof of deposits made into offshore accounts that can be repatriated. The level of detail and the offer of immediate access to the diverted assets was something I didn't expect. It meant that he had really prepared for this conversation, that it wasn't an impulsive decision. One last question, Charles. Why did you start all this? He ran his hand through his graying hair, a gesture I once found charming, and now seemed just the nervous tick of a man cornered. The easy answer would be to say it was for money, or for revenge at Richard's request. But the truth, he took a deep breath. The truth is that for a long time I was addicted to the adrenaline of reinventing life, of being accepted into worlds to which I never naturally belonged. Each new scam was more difficult, more elaborate than the last. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of overcoming my own burden of poverty and insignificance. There was a genuine vulnerability in his confession that caught me off guard. Not sympathy for the con artist, but an uncomfortable recognition of the human complexity that we would prefer to ignore. People are rarely one-dimensional monsters, even when their actions are monstrous. I'll contact you through Dr. Miller in 48 hours with my decision, I replied finally, getting up to end our meeting. As I walked away, I heard his low voice behind me. Thank you, Elizabeth, for listening at least. The following days were of intense reflection and research. First, I confirmed with Dr. Miller the existence of the mentioned safe deposit box and its contents. Everything was exactly as Charles described. Then, we verified the veracity of the threats against the family in Portugal. Our contacts confirmed suspicious movements near their residence in Lisbon and attempted intrusions into the school system where the children studied. It was during this turbulent period that I received the diagnosis that would put everything into perspective. What I imagined to be just accumulated stress and sleepless nights was, in fact, early-stage lymphoma. Treatable, but it would require immediate chemotherapy and total focus on recovery for the next few months. You need to drastically reduce your stress level, explained Dr. Goldstein, oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. These complex emotional issues can significantly impact the treatment. Sitting in the doctor's office, facing the tests that confirmed the illness, I experienced a clarity I had never felt before. Charles's machinations, the betrayals, the recent revelations, everything suddenly seemed less urgent in the face of my own mortality. How much time will I have to dedicate to the treatment? I asked. At least 6 months of intensive therapy. Then, regular follow-up for a few years. Your prognosis is excellent, but only if you prioritize your health now. Leaving the hospital, I made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew me as the ruthless businesswoman. I called an extraordinary meeting with Dr. Miller, with whom I spent the next few hours outlining a plan that many would consider insane. Are you absolutely sure? He asked repeatedly. There are less risky alternatives. Yes. For the first time in a long time, I'm absolutely sure of what I need to do. The next morning, I met Charles at a discreet cafe near Central Park. His expression revealed surprise at seeing me so early. He clearly expected me to take the full 2 days to decide. I agree to help you and your family, I announced without preamble, but with non-negotiable conditions. He looked relieved but cautious. I'm listening. First, you will provide all the evidence against Richard and his associates, without omission. Second, you will sign a full confession about everything you did against me and other women, to be kept confidential temporarily by Dr. Miller. Third, you will officially return every penny and asset you diverted, with complete and transparent documentation. Charles nodded slowly. I agree with all of that. Those are fair terms. I'm not finished. Fourth, and most importantly, you will manage my companies for the next 6 months, strictly following the guidelines I will establish, while I take time off to deal with health issues. His face registered the shock I expected. You're asking me to manage your assets? After everything? I'm not asking, I'm demanding. With strict legal supervision, of course. Dr. Miller and a team of independent auditors will monitor every decision, every financial move. You will have operational authority, but no direct access to the funds. But why? Why would you trust me with that? I looked him directly in the eye. Because you're brilliant in business, Charles. Your strategic mind is genuinely exceptional. I've used that against you in recent weeks, studying your methods. And because this is your only chance for real redemption. Not just words or promises, but concrete actions that benefit someone other than yourself. He remained silent for almost a minute, processing the proposal. Is your diagnosis serious? He finally asked with an intuition that always characterized him. Treatable, with total dedication. Something I can't do while managing 32 stores in 10 states. You could appoint any trusted executive. Why me? I smiled with a calmness that surprised even myself. Because you have more to lose if you fail. Because you know my business intimately after years of studying it to defraud me. And because, ironically, you are the only one who fully understands the value of what I built, since you so meticulously planned how to take it from me. The fifth major twist in this story happened when Dr. Miller, meticulously analyzing the prenuptial agreements and other legal documents, discovered something extraordinary. It's almost unbelievable, he explained in my hospital room after the first chemotherapy session. Due to a peculiarity in New York's asset protection laws, the scheme devised by Charles inadvertently created a situation where he not only wouldn't be able to access your fortune as planned, but also legally transferred part of his own assets to you. How so? By creating the MTC company with the specific purpose of hiding diverted assets, but registering certain properties as acquired during the marriage under the equitable distribution regime, he generated documentation that legally entitles you to 50% of all MTC assets, including those he owned before he met you. The irony was magnificent. The sophisticated con artist had become entangled in his own complex legal web. The man who dedicated years to planning my financial ruin had unknowingly strengthened my asset position. 6 months passed. My treatment was progressing positively, with doctors optimistic about a complete remission. Charles, surprisingly, fulfilled every term of our agreement. He not only kept my companies running flawlessly, but implemented innovations that increased profitability by 22% in the third quarter. Richard and 6 of his associates were arrested after investigations triggered by the evidence provided. Charles's Portuguese family was resettled with new identities, with the teenagers gradually adapting to life in the United States. New Year's Eve in Times Square would mark the end of our strange, forced partnership. I met Charles near Rockefeller Center, where we arranged for the final transfer of company management. Around me, thousands of people dressed in white celebrated the arrival of the new year, indifferent to the personal drama that was discreetly ending amidst the crowd. The final reports were sent to Dr. Miller this afternoon, he said, handing me a flash drive. All passwords, access information, and procedures are documented. Your team will have no difficulty regaining control. I accepted the device with a nod. And your plans now? I will serve the alternative sentence as agreed with the prosecutor's office. Community service and financial restitution for 5 years. After that, he hesitated. I don't know. Start over, honestly this time. I watched, his face looking for signs of the manipulator I knew, but finding only weariness and a strange peace. The transformation seemed genuine, although I knew that with Charles, appearances were always deceiving. You know what's most ironic? I asked. During these months of treatment, I discovered that the money and the empire I built, which you so coveted, didn't mean as much as I thought. How so? Illness has a peculiar way of clarifying our priorities. I realized that I spent decades building a financial fortress because I believed it would protect me from vulnerability, that I would never again be the poor girl from Queens depending on the charity of others. The countdown to midnight began around us, voices joining in a growing chorus. And what did you discover? He asked, genuinely curious. That true strength is not in what we possess, but in what survives when we lose everything. That even betrayed, manipulated, and diagnosed with cancer, I found in myself a resilience that no scam could shake. The crowd exploded in celebration as fireworks began to illuminate the New York sky. Music, hugs, champagne being opened everywhere. You never needed me or anyone else to feel complete, Elizabeth, said Charles, his voice almost lost in the noise of the celebration. That was always your greatest strength, and my biggest mistake was not realizing that seducing someone like you would require more truth than lies. I don't regret anything, I replied with the serenity that time and recovery had brought me. Not the pain, not the discoveries, not even trusting you in the beginning. All of this brought me here. We said goodbye without drama, without grand gestures, just two people who lived intensely and emerged transformed from an extraordinary experience. As I walked through the festive crowd, alone but strangely fulfilled, I recalled Dr. Miller's contained smile at that first meeting when we discovered the scam. He didn't smile out of mockery or to anticipate legal victory. He smiled because he saw in me, even before I could recognize it, the strength that would allow me to transform the worst betrayal of my life into the most powerful journey of self-discovery. Perhaps the real scam was against the destiny that others planned for me, a destiny of victimhood that I refused to accept. The New York sky shone with multicolored promises of a new beginning. The crowd celebrated the new year with that collective hope so characteristic of late December. I observed everything with the clarity of someone who survived not only cancer, but the complete dissolution and reconstruction of her identity. I picked up my cell phone and opened the message I had prepared earlier, an announcement to my executive team about structural changes in the company. After 3 decades at the helm, I was ready for something new. Not retirement, but reinvention. Educational foundations for women entrepreneurs, mentoring for young people from vulnerable areas, new possibilities that would have previously seemed a waste of time for the ruthless businesswoman I once was. Charles was right about one thing, I thought, as I sent the message that would change the course of the next few years. Reinventing yourself is addictive. The difference is that my reinvention would not come at the expense of others, but as a legacy for them. As the first dawn of the year broke over New York, I walked slowly home, a different woman from the one who, a year earlier, had found hidden documents in the lining of a closet. That Elizabeth died sometime between the betrayal and the cure, not tragically, but transformatively. And in her place, someone more complete, more real, and infinitely more free had emerged.